Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. In this video, folks, we're going to be going into talk a little bit about affiliation, right? But let me preface the video by saying, in most things, we jump in from the organizational culture side of the house because that's oftentimes where we congregate as teams and as groups and so on and so forth. But all of this, the dots connect and everything is connected. And much of what you can glean from this also will ripple out. You'll see some commonalities and some beneficial aspects and nuggets of wisdom potentially that you'll find useful not only in your organizations, but also within the community, within different groups you're affiliated, as well as friend groups, family, and so on and so forth. So as we go through this, take some of this not only to help elevate your own personal and professional life, but the lives of the folks around you as well. And, kind of that's the point, right? And without any further ado, onward and upward, let's talk a little bit about affiliation. A lot of times we think of affiliation, which is true. Hey, I'm affiliated with this group, right? You might be a member of a particular group, right? At one point, I was in the Air Force. I was affiliated with the military, right? In a direct day-to-day capacity, right? Now I'm a retiree. I'm affiliated with that group now, right? So these are the types of things. What are you associated with, right? And it doesn't matter. You could be a student in college, right? You're affiliated with your school. Where you work, you're affiliated with the organization that you work for, right? If you're an owner or a leader in a business, you're affiliated from that perspective, right? As the owner or a business owner, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, all the clubs, groups, and civic organizations and faith-based organizations as well. So, affiliation, it's really one way to be identified. But there's some interesting little nuances to affiliation that we kind of have to be aware of. And I don't want this video to go too long. I just want to kind of bring some things to light so that you can kind of marinate on it a little bit. Affiliation essentially, and probably good that I have the whiteboard for myself as much as you, because I'm a visual thinker, a visual person. But affiliation, if you think about it from the groups that you're associated, right? You might be affiliated, let's say when we were in school, you might have been affiliated as an athlete, right? It might have been, from that side of the house. And then another group, right? So you had your athletes, and I don't want to get into all the isms because then everybody's like, oh, but you might have been, folks who were a little bit more on the, so you have your athletic, you have your more academic, right? Academics, we'll leave it at that, right? And then you have just, as we'll have our different groups that we're affiliated by, right? And it's typically interest driven, right? Not necessarily because we're in school because of a profession, right? Or, an expertise per se, right? Although we are probably pretty decent in the area that we're in. But we typically have those, and what we've seen as, especially in the United States, as we've elevate through our education system where, and times do change and things do happen where there's not always a lot of crossover. You might have some that cross over in different ways, but for the most part, they kind of have their own little bubble, right? And so affiliation, pretty early, we figure out in school, right, that this affiliation can work for you and against you, right? Because there's, acceptance. Let's see, I'll put it right here. There's acceptance within the group that you're in, right? There's acceptance. So you're in your group and there's acceptance, but not so much if you're outside of your group, right? Now, there are exceptions. I'm using, more of the extreme, I guess you could say, but just to show some things here, okay? But that there's generally acceptance within the group that you're affiliated with, right? You're not in that group, you're not affiliated, right? There's very little sanctuary in groups that you're not affiliated. And if you think about this, it's not a whole lot different within the culture at large, right? If you're a particular faith, go into something that's completely different. There isn't always an acceptance, right? Because you're not affiliated with that group, right? So not as much sanctuary there, right? But this goes beyond that. Organizationally, you can see some of this, right? Where different businesses will say competitors. This could just as easily be different competitors, right? This could be different athletic shoe brands, right? That you're accepted within the sanctuary of that organization, right? That particular product-esque line, right? But you can see how everything gets broken up, right? Into these, you could say factions if you want, but it's basically, you're affiliated in the different groups, right? You're grouped in different groupings, and then some overlap. Of course, there's nothing that's completely an island to itself, but for the most part, we do see these bubbles, right? And now think of this inside an organization, right? If you are part of the workforce, we'll just say this is the leaders and their support staff here, and this is the broader team, right? Put the broader team. They're all part of the team, but you get the idea that while there is an awareness by the broader team that leaders are serve a particular function, there isn't always an acceptance, right? There isn't always an acceptance, and vice versa. In some regards, some leaders and support staff, they kind of like their affiliation. There's a specialness. Both can feel a specialness to their own affiliation. These people may be trades folks or engineers. It doesn't matter how and what arena, because there's so many different professions, right? But the broader team has its specialty and its focus and its expertise, right? And so does the leadership team and so forth, right? But this is where we get a lot of this us and them, right? They're affiliated. They feel an affiliation. Sadly, what's troubling, this is a troubling thing, and it's nothing new. We all know this. I'm just going to state what we already know. Some try to become leaders because they don't want to be told what to do. Well, anybody if you've lived more than 5 minutes on planet Earth, there is always somebody that you have to answer to. There's the customer, ultimately, who you have to answer to, right? But even organizationally, it just goes on and on and on, right, folks? Until you finally get to the CEO or whatever. And they're so far removed in many cases that there can be a disconnect. And if you want to talk about affiliation, that gets way outside the lanes. But within, say, a site level, right, or even a division level and so forth, you see where this affiliation has a certain sanctuary and acceptance, and then of course some are trying to, not all, the broader team don't really care always to, hey, I want to become the leader of this organization. But there are those who are pursuing that as a career focus, and that's great. But what you do see, and this is just a little sidebar, is when people try to elevate themselves educationally, experientially, and they want to take on what? The responsibility and accountability and all of these things to become, say, a leader in an organization, you'll see pretty quickly anybody, it's crabs in a bucket. Somebody trying to escape that bucket, boy, they're going to do what they can to try to, pull that person down. And that's where you see some nefarious activities typically start to kind of rear their ugly head. A lot of times, this is why people who try to, elevate their education experience to try to take on a higher accountability and responsibility, oftentimes will move to other organizations and so forth, because it's just not always practical, because people can't always separate, right? So people struggle with that. So you get kind of a general feel for affiliation, but it gets a little bit more dicey too, because, and you can look back in my video that I did on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but under the love and belonging is where affiliation is. And this gets more into the, I guess you could say the person level, but so there's love and belonging, okay? It's like number 3 out of 5. And this is, I guess you could say it's fascinating or interesting. Love and belonging is where affiliation lies. And it's really group acceptance, right? So it's a group acceptance, right? When the group accepts me, then it gives me my identity. Now, identity. Spell. Okay, got it. Sorry. Make sure I'm using English. English is my first language. Love and belonging, group acceptance, okay? And then if you're accepted, so remember we talked about these different groups. When you have that acceptance, it now starts to go from I am a part of this group, right? I was an athlete coming up, so I'm an athlete, part of the athletic, the athletes in, say, school. But at a certain point, right, we heard the term jock. Okay, jock comes out of that, right? And now you're identified by the group that you're in, right? Your identity, your individual identity is absorbed into that, right? So your individual. Your identity as an individual is now a part of this group, okay? And so your identity starts to become, your individuality gets a little bit usurped. Let's just say what it is. And we get conditioned to this as we're developing, especially during these youth or developing years and that sort of thing. This is why it's good to have good broad interests and multiple and different avenues of interest, and to be involved in many different, with many different groups, right? Strangely enough, to be identified with many groups actually shows more individuality. It doesn't mean you have to, but because anytime we get canned, right? You see this like in drama, or in say the movie world and all this, and the actors world. They don't be typecast as this one thing, right? So think of that whole typecast scenario where this person only plays a law enforcement person in movies or something like that. Their individual identity is now becoming part of that motif, right? The group. So you have this, and then also too, you usurp some of you've usurped some of your identity just being a part of them. But when the group itself now begins to be a yay or nay, right? When you do this, what can happen is, or when you become or a part of this, your voice is absorbed. Okay, your voice gets absorbed, and now that individuality starts to become taken over a little bit. And now the group, if you're identified with that group, now their voice, the group's voice is elevated over your voice, right? Where else do we see that? We see that in politics, right? So, whether it's party and so on and so forth, you may have certain things that you align with, but now somebody starts to speak for you, right? This is where this whole slippery slope, and this is how it all goes, right? This is why you see those pendulums swinging back and forth. Why is that? Because somebody always oversteps their bounds, and the voices tend to become more extreme. Doesn't matter what party you're a part of, right? So, but you usurp your individual voice for the group voice, and this is where groupthink comes from, folks. And this is the worst scenario that you can have is groupthink. Okay, because once groupthink happens, you will essentially you won't do anything. You won't speak out. You won't say, "Hey, this isn't right. We need to fix this." Da 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 da. You'll go along and you'll make excuses, and this is now your individual voice. Now this is where the dotted line to where excuses, right? You start making excuses for the group. And I know this is getting real ugly, so let me clean it up. But you'll start making excuses for the group, okay? And where do we see that? Where do we see that? Well, have somebody in your organization as part of the team become part of the quality team, okay? And one of the most difficult things for some to do is to go into a quality role in the same organization because they don't want to, because their affiliation came from the group who are now that they are examining the quality of their work, right? Whether it's the work they're actually, the function of doing the work or the products themselves, right? And so, what you see is that affiliation now is threatened, right? They don't have that affiliation. They're kind of out there now. I remember when I became an evaluator in the Air Force, I went through this very same thing. And you find out pretty quick that affiliation, that whole voice thing, when you're part of a particular group, it's fine. You were one of us. Now you're not one of us, right? It isn't a hateful thing, but it is kind of a like, you're over there, right? It might be a similar thing if you, and I'm just making something up, right? If you come from a crime family and then somebody becomes law enforcement, you've lost the affiliation of that crime family, right? because now you're other. You're other than what we are. So you see how this plays out, and the group accepts or doesn't accept you. You're either affiliated or you're not. So you are essentially giving up your individual voice. And we see this. And where does it emanate? It emanates really from fear, folks. It doesn't emanate necessarily because the group hates any one person, right? Now, you can have situations happen, right? Where these things, feathers can get ruffled and temperaments can be, stressed. But for the most part, the group doesn't really have any kind of a hateful thing toward their people. But if, and this is why the whole whistleblower thing, right? A whistleblower is no longer has affiliation, right? So we're talking about this. You're probably going, okay, Steve, why do I care? Well, there's a water line, and I'm about to unlock something here for you, especially if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once you understand this, and there are people out there who are very individualistic, and they get it. I mean, you come across them. They're not the majority, but you will come across them. They aren't afraid to tell somebody, hey, what time it is, right? And a member of the group that they're affiliated with. And what does that mean? They're leaders, okay? They don't necessarily have to be the leader. They could be informal leaders, right? Situational leadership, all those sorts of things. But they're leaders, okay? And that's the thing about if you want to become a leader, I'm just going to tell you right now, you have to be willing to stand on the thing this is what, accountability, integrity, responsibility, all the itties, okay, are are the thing you need to be able to stand on and stand alone. Better to stand alone than to stand with a group who's running quickly over the cliff, okay? Because the individual who is speaking up to do the right thing, right? This is, and you see this, and it happens. But I'm going to tell you how to get to a place, and how you know, okay, that you're able to have your individual voice no matter what your affiliation is, okay? Because it's fine to take some, look, I'm retired Air Force. Yeah, I was affiliated with that, and I took pride in my work, and I enjoyed the heck out of the team that I served with, all those things, all the good stuff, right? And was it perfect? No, it wasn't perfect, but it was probably better than most organizational experiences out there, to be honest with you. And the people, I mean, quite honestly, the best and finest people I've ever worked with my entire life. And I have an eye for these things, okay? But I'm not just biased because I was in it. But there's a threshold. And that threshold, once you know it, once you understand this, it is going to allow your development individually. Doesn't matter if you're a leader, in middle management, doesn't matter if you're the broader team, doesn't matter. You can, or moving through those in a different ways. And that is self-actualization. When you get to the number one in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization. Easy for you to say, Steve. Can you spell it? All right, self-actualization. Once you have gone through the experiences, okay, you've been affiliated, you have competence, right? You're regarded as doing high quality work, and your expertise and everything has grown, right? And you're regarded by those around you as an expert in the fields that you've been in and all these things. Not the expert, but you have an expertise, a level of expertise. Okay. You have a confidence, okay? There is a certain point at which you start to reach the self-actualization part of the equation. And this is where I'll refer you back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the video I did on that. Watch that video. Once you reach that self-actualization, you get above and I say above the waterline. Once you get above the waterline, it doesn't matter what any group, doesn't matter affiliated groups, it doesn't matter what the group is. I mean, think of it this way. Remember when I talked to you before about, the different bubbles, right? And this could just as easily be a family group, right? A family circle or a friend circle, right? Family or friends, doesn't matter. It could family or friends. Once you reach self-actualization, this is what it comes down to, folks. You can love your friends and you can love your family, but you don't give up. And this is the same with organizations, but I'm using this as an example other than organizations just so you get the feel. Because you don't want to give up your voice to any group, right? When you hit self-actualization, it is impossible for any group to sway you using guilt and all the things, right? All the codependencies, all the, making you feel bad for this and feel bad for that, and all the things, right? In fact, while they're doing it, in the back of your mind, you're kind of having an inside chuckle. You're just like, yeah, I see what you're trying to do. It's kind of funny, it's kind of humorous in its own cute little way. But because once you hit self-actualization, love them, but you're not affected by, whether they accept you or not. You accept me because I'm worthy of being accepted. If you don't, that's your problem, not mine, right? That's your own issue, right? Because I know who I am and da-da-da-da-da. That's how you know you've reached self-actualization. And the only way for you not to be affected, is to develop yourself up through self-actualization, right? Now, you could get here, intellectually, but think of it this way. If somebody can make you feel bad for something, right? And I don't mean like you go out and do something bad. Obviously, you should be feeling that. If you have self-actualization, you're not going to want to do anybody harm. Okay, you're just not. Even if you had a wily youth, as you develop, you won't even. That's not even a person who you are. Okay, but when you get self-actualization, all the little games, all the little things, it's like somebody throwing a pillow at you, and you're like, oh, isn't that cute? Oh, isn't that cute how you tried to guilt me? Oh, isn't that cute how you're trying to make me feel bad for this? Or isn't that cute how you're trying to da 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 da, right? Make you feel like you're letting someone down, right? Now, but that's different from actually letting someone down, right? Don't like this isn't to say you get here and you have a license to let people down and to do awful things. No, it isn't. It is to say, though, once you hit self-actualization, that you can no longer be duped and scammed by people who are trying to emotionally manipulate you. Okay. Now, why are we talking about this? Because organizations can do the same thing to team members. They can make them feel bad. They can pit management against the broader team, and the broader team can be pitted against leaders and leadership support staff, right? But you have to be wise enough, and you have to grow. This is why you do some of that shadow work. This is why we dig in to find out, hey, what are the things that set me off, that make me feel bad, and why do I feel bad, and who makes me feel bad, right? And once you figure this out, you quickly go, oh, and then what this also allows you to do is you learn. And even if it's like, because it's not like you're not going to throw your friends and family away. I mean, there may be cases where they're so toxic that you have no choice, but you're going to put at least emotional or intellectual boundary around that, so that whenever you start to see them broach that electric fence of trying to make you feel bad or shamed or any of those things, you're going to see it coming, and you're going to go, oh, okay. And then you're going to want to take the time to learn how to deal with that. I'm not going to get into that now, but you do want to deal with these things in a cogent way, right? And you don't want to make things worse, right? But you need to understand it, right? It's not like your pets don't have higher intellectual thinking. Your pets aren't self-actualized either, right? Now, if they come running at you, barking and da 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 da, right? Are you going to be affected by that? You might be like, oh, okay, they're off the chain, right? Literally, if they're, say, a rabid dog or something, right? You're self-actualized to know that I don't need this dog to love me, right? Just like you don't need anything to love you. If you're self-actualized, you know you're lovable. You know you're worthy, okay? And the journey to getting to being self-actualized is a process. Okay, so go back and look at the Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs video, and you can Google Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs and educate yourself on it a little bit, because what you're going to find is that all the good stuff is up here. All the creative stuff is up here. If you want to become your own self-made business person or leader, an effective and balanced and fair leader, you want to get to here. You really do, because here, this is identified with purpose. You'll know you're here because you'll know what your purpose is. Okay. All right. You'll know what your purpose is, and it won't be something that was necessarily assigned. Your purpose wasn't necessarily assigned by any group. It doesn't have to be family and friends, but it can be any group, right? Any group who wants to tell you what your identity is and wants to tell you what's good or not and what you can and shouldn't do and da 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 da, right? Obviously, if you're here, you're going to do good things, right? We want to say good. I mean, we're going to be, we're going to treat people well. We're not going to treat people poorly, okay? And we're going to do the things that follow in line with that. But to be a part of a group that's trying to shame you into doing things, or not speaking your mind, or not speaking up, or not speaking out when things are wrong, that's how you know things are going off the rails. And this is another aspect of why organizations struggle and fail, because right, organizations struggle and fail all the time because they don't understand. They're basically trying to shame you in a lot of ways, even through policies and things like that, where it isn't about creating cohesion, but it's polarizing different departments, polarizing leaders in the workforce, right? Um, an unhealthy HR department will spend much of its time trying to create the us and them under the guise of trying to bring everybody together. So be wary of those scenarios, because that's a tricky deal. Does that mean all HR people are bad? No. But the nefarious, just like any nefarious, will operate to keep conflict in action, because they believe, not just they, but the notion is that if there's conflict, right, if there's conflict, then people aren't focused in on things that that they should be focused in on. And it sounds counterintuitive, but it is. And it is kind of like when the powers that be try to get culture to look over here at this, while over here something else is being snafu'd on us, right? It's changing the frame of reference. And that's all it is, really. It's just changing the frame of reference, so you're not looking at something that probably needs to be fixed, right? You're less worried about something that needs to be fixed if you're in a big dramatic thing. And if you can be pulled into dramatic things, you're probably holding on too tight to his affiliations too, right? Because you should be able to cogently express yourself in a respectful, professional manner to say, hey, these are the things that aren't working, and these are the things that need to get better, okay? You want your entire team to be on a road to this. Ultimately, they've got to walk their own journey. But if you can give them the avenue, that's another way to enhance team cohesion, is to put them on a track. Tell them, show them Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They'll get it and you'll get it, but they'll also understand where they are in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they'll also understand, hey, I want to get to a higher level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I wonder how I get there. And then they can pursue their own journey. All right, folks, didn't want this one to go too long. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When we do this, not only helping to transform culture, but we're transforming our own lives. But remember, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not willing to transform on the inside. That's super important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.